The dusty streets of Redemption Creek stretched endlessly under the scorching Arizona sun, where every shadow promised either salvation or damnation. Sarah Mitchell clutched her worn leather satchel tighter as she stepped off the creaking stagecoach, her emerald eyes scanning the unfamiliar frontier town that would either become her sanctuary or her grave. The year was 1882, and she had traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston, carrying nothing but heartbreak, determination, and a secret that could destroy everything she hoped to build. Her delicate hands, once soft from a life of privilege, now bore the calluses of desperation and survival. The scorching heat immediately embraced her like an unwelcome lover, making her long for the cool Atlantic breezes of her former home. But there was no going back now. Not after what had happened. Not after the scandal that had torn her world apart and left her reputation in shambles. Before we continue this incredible journey of love, loss, and redemption in the Wild West, I'd love for you to subscribe to our channel and let me know in the comments what city you're watching from. Your support means everything to us as we bring these amazing stories to life. The town of Redemption Creek buzzed with the typical chaos of frontier life. Cowboys hollering, horses neighing, and the constant sound of hammers building dreams from raw timber and stubborn hope. Sarah's arrival didn't go unnoticed. In a town where women were scarce and gossip traveled faster than wildfire, a beautiful stranger was bound to attract attention. She wore a modest blue traveling dress that had seen better days, her auburn hair pinned back in a practical bun that couldn't quite contain the rebellious curls that framed her heart-shaped face. Her porcelain skin, though now kissed by the desert sun, still held traces of the refined lady she once was. But her eyes, those striking emerald eyes, held depths of pain that spoke of experiences no proper lady should ever endure. As she made her way down the main street, dodging horse-drawn wagons and stepping carefully around the ever-present dust and debris, Sarah felt the weight of curious stares following her every movement. The men tipped their hats with varying degrees of respect and interest, while the few women she encountered regarded her with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity. She had learned to read people quickly during her journey west. It was a skill that had kept her alive and relatively safe through countless dangerous situations. The saloon girls peered at her from behind painted faces and colorful dresses, perhaps recognizing a kindred spirit who had also fallen from grace, while the respectable wives clutched their children closer and whispered behind gloved hands. Her destination was the small boarding house at the end of Main Street, a weathered two-story building that promised clean sheets and hot meals for those who could afford them. Mrs. Henderson, the proprietor, was a stern-faced woman in her 50s who had seen enough of life to ask few questions as long as the rent was paid on time. Sarah had written ahead, using the last of her carefully hoarded money to secure a room for a month. Enough time, she hoped, to find work and establish herself in this harsh but promising land. The boarding house smelled of lye soap, coffee, and the faint aroma of whatever stew was simmering in the kitchen for the evening meal. "You'll be in room 7, upstairs and to the right," Mrs. Henderson informed her, handing over a heavy iron key. "Meals are served at 6, noon, and 6 again. No men allowed upstairs, no drinking in the rooms, and rent is due every Friday morning. You seem like a decent sort, Miss Mitchell, but I've learned not to judge books by their covers out here in the territories." Sarah nodded gratefully, understanding the unspoken warning. She climbed the narrow wooden stairs, each step creaking under her weight, and found her room to be small but clean, with a single window overlooking the bustling street below. The furnishings were sparse: a narrow bed with a patchwork quilt, a washstand with a chipped ceramic basin, and a small wooden chair that had seen better decades. But it was hers, at least for now, and that was more than she'd had in months. She set her satchel on the bed and moved to the window, watching the endless parade of humanity that made up frontier life. Cowboys rode in from distant ranches, their faces weathered by sun and wind, their clothes dusty from long days in the saddle. Merchants hawked their wares from wooden storefronts, competing with each other in volume and enthusiasm. Children ran through the streets, dodging horses and playing games that would have horrified their eastern counterparts. And through it all, the constant presence of danger lurked just beneath the surface. Men wore guns like other men wore pocket watches, and disputes were often settled with lead rather than words. As evening approached, Sarah ventured downstairs for her first meal at Mrs. Henderson's table. The dining room was filled with an eclectic mix of boarders, traveling salesmen, prospectors down on their luck, a schoolteacher who looked as lost as Sarah felt, and several working men whose occupations she could only guess at. The conversation was lively and often crude, but she detected an underlying kindness among these rough people who had all in their own ways come west seeking something better than what they'd left behind. It was during this first meal that she heard his name mentioned for the first time. Jake Morrison, a local rancher who owned one of the largest spreads in the territory. A man whose reputation preceded him, like thunder before lightning. The other boarders spoke of him with a mixture of respect and wariness, describing him as fair but hard, generous but demanding, and completely unforgiving of those who crossed him or threatened what was his. "He's looking for help at the ranch," mentioned Tom Bradley, a grizzled prospector who'd been in the territory for over a decade. "Lost his housekeeper last month when she up and married that banker from Tucson. Good pay, they say, but he's particular about who he hires. Doesn't trust easy, that one, and can't say I blame him after what happened with his wife." The mention of Jake's wife sparked Sarah's curiosity, but the conversation quickly moved on to other topics: the weather, the price of cattle, and rumors of Apache raids in the southern territories. She filed the information away, though, sensing that this Jake Morrison might represent an opportunity for employment if she could prove herself worthy of his trust. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed, listening to the sounds of the frontier town settling into its restless sleep, Sarah allowed herself to remember the events that had brought her to this place. The memories came flooding back, despite her efforts to keep them buried. The betrayal, the scandal, the way her entire world had crumbled in the space of a single evening. She had been engaged to Charles Whitmore, the son of one of Boston's most prominent families, a man she had believed loved her, despite her family's recent financial troubles. But Charles had proven to be as false as fool's gold, more interested in her father's business connections than in her heart. When those connections had dried up, along with her father's fortune, Charles had quickly found reasons to end their engagement, spreading vicious rumors about her character to protect his own reputation. The scandal had destroyed not only her prospects for marriage, but also her family's standing in Boston society. Her father, already weakened by business failures and mounting debts, had suffered a heart attack that left him an invalid. Her mother, unable to cope with the shame and financial ruin, had retreated into a world of laudanum and self-pity. With no other options and creditors closing in, Sarah had made the difficult decision to head west, hoping to find work and eventually send money back to help her parents. She had sold everything of value she possessed except for her mother's wedding ring, which she wore on a chain around her neck as a reminder of better times and the love that had once filled her life. The journey had been long and dangerous, filled with uncomfortable stagecoach rides, questionable accommodations, and the constant threat of bandits or hostile Indians. But she had survived, and now she was here in Redemption Creek, ready to start over and build a new life from the ashes of her old one. She had skills that might prove valuable in this rough country. She could read and write better than most. She knew how to manage a household, and she had learned to be resourceful and determined in ways that her privileged upbringing had never required. Tomorrow, she would begin looking for work, and perhaps this Jake Morrison would prove to be the answer to her prayers. The next morning dawned clear and hot, with the promise of another scorching day ahead. Sarah dressed carefully, in her most practical outfit, a simple brown skirt and white blouse that wouldn't show dust too readily, and made her way downstairs for breakfast. Mrs. Henderson had prepared a hearty meal of eggs, bacon, and biscuits that would fuel her for the day ahead. The other boarders were already discussing their plans, and Sarah listened carefully, trying to learn as much as possible about the opportunities available in and around Redemption Creek. After breakfast, she set out to explore the town more thoroughly and inquire about employment. Her first stop was the general store, where she hoped the proprietor might know of families in need of domestic help. The store was a fascinating maze of goods from all over the country. Everything from farming implements to fancy dress fabrics, patent medicines to ammunition. The owner, a friendly man named Samuel Porter, listened to her inquiry with interest. "Well now, Miss Mitchell, there's always folks needing help around here, but finding the right situation can be tricky. You seem like a refined lady, and I'd hate to see you end up somewhere that wouldn't appreciate your qualities. There's the Morrison Ranch, of course. Jake's been looking for a housekeeper since Mrs. Garcia left to get married. But he's mighty particular about who he hires, especially after what happened with his wife." Sarah's curiosity about Jake Morrison's wife grew stronger, but she didn't want to appear too eager for gossip. Instead, she asked practical questions about the position and how she might apply for it. Mr. Porter gave her directions to the Morrison Ranch, which lay about 5 miles outside of town, and suggested she speak with Jake directly rather than sending a letter. "He likes to look a person in the eye when he's making decisions," Mr. Porter explained. "You can rent a horse from the livery stable, or if you're feeling adventurous, the morning supply wagon heads out that way around 10 o'clock. Driver's name is Pete, and he's harmless enough, though he talks your ear off if you let him." Sarah decided to take the supply wagon, both to save money and to learn more about the area from someone who knew it well. Pete turned out to be exactly as advertised. A cheerful, talkative man in his 60s who seemed to know everyone and everything within a 50-mile radius. As they bounced along the dusty road in his heavily loaded wagon, he regaled her with stories about the territory, the people who lived there, and the challenges of frontier life. "Jake Morrison's a good man," Pete told her as they passed through a particularly scenic stretch of rolling hills dotted with cattle. "Came out here about 8 years ago with his wife Elena. She was a beautiful woman, Spanish blood, with eyes like midnight, and a laugh that could charm the birds from the trees. They were happy as larks for the first few years, building up the ranch, talking about the children they'd have someday. Pete's expression grew somber as he continued the story. But then Elena got sick, some kind of fever that the doc couldn't cure. Jake tried everything, brought in specialists from back east, even took her to California to see if the climate would help. But nothing worked, and she passed away 3 years ago, come September. Jake hasn't been the same since. Oh, he still runs the ranch well enough, and he's fair to his workers. But there's a sadness in him that goes bone deep. Sarah felt a pang of sympathy for this man she'd never met, understanding all too well the pain of loss and disappointment. Perhaps they would have more in common than she'd initially thought. As they crested a hill, Pete pointed ahead to a sprawling ranch complex nestled in a valley between 2 ridges. There she is, the Morrison spread, one of the finest ranches in the territory, and Jake built most of it with his own 2 hands. That big house there, he designed it special for Elena, with all those windows to let in the light she loved so much. Breaks your heart to think of him rattling around in there all alone. The Morrison Ranch was indeed impressive, with a large 2-story house that managed to look both substantial and welcoming. The architecture showed influences from both American and Spanish traditions, with wide porches, red tile accents, and carefully planned landscaping that had somehow survived the harsh desert climate. Outbuildings were scattered around the main house, barns, corrals, bunkhouses, and various worksheds that spoke of a well-organized and prosperous operation. As Pete's wagon rolled into the main yard, Sarah could see cowboys going about their daily tasks, tending to horses, mending fences, and preparing for what looked like a cattle drive. The men were clearly experienced and professional, working with the easy efficiency that came from years of practice. Several of them looked up as the wagon approached, touching their hat brims politely when they noticed Sarah. "Jake's probably in the main barn," Pete told her as he began unloading supplies. "That's where he spends most of his time when he's not out on the range. Just follow that path there, and you can't miss it." Sarah thanked Pete for the ride and made her way toward the barn, her heart beating faster with each step. This was her chance to secure employment and begin building her new life, but she knew that first impressions would be crucial. She had to present herself as competent and trustworthy, while also showing that she understood the realities of frontier life. The barn was a massive structure that smelled of hay, leather, and horses. Sunlight streamed through the open doors, creating patterns of light and shadow that danced across the packed earth floor. She could hear voices coming from one of the stalls, and as she approached, she caught her first glimpse of Jake Morrison. He was exactly what she had expected, and not tall and lean, with broad shoulders that spoke of years of physical labor. He moved with the confident grace of a man completely comfortable in his environment. His dark hair was slightly longer than fashion dictated, and his face was weathered by sun and wind into a map of experience and determination. But it was his eyes that caught her attention. Deep blue eyes that seemed to see everything and reveal nothing. Eyes that held depths of pain, carefully hidden behind walls of self-control. He was examining a horse's hoof, speaking in low, soothing tones to the animal, while a younger cowboy held the lead rope. His hands were gentle but sure as he worked, and Sarah could see the care and expertise that went into everything he did. When he finally looked up and noticed her standing in the doorway, those blue eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her feel as though he could see straight through to her soul. "Can I help you, miss?" His voice was deep and measured, with just a hint of wariness that suggested he wasn't used to unexpected visitors, especially female ones. Sarah stepped forward, drawing on every ounce of confidence she possessed. "Mr. Morrison, my name is Sarah Mitchell. I understand you might be in need of a housekeeper, and I'd like to apply for the position." Jake straightened slowly, his eyes never leaving her face as he assessed this unexpected applicant. She could see him taking in her appearance, her manner of speaking, and probably a dozen other details that would help him decide whether she was worth his time. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft sounds of horses moving in their stalls and the distant voices of cowboys going about their work. "You're not from around here," he said finally, and it wasn't a question. "No, sir. I arrived in Redemption Creek yesterday from Boston. I'm looking for honest work, and I have experience managing a household." Sarah kept her voice steady and professional, though her heart was racing. Boston. Jake repeated the word as though it left a bad taste in his mouth. "Long way from home, Miss Mitchell. What brings a Boston lady to the Arizona territory?" Sarah had prepared for this question, knowing that her story would need to be both truthful and carefully edited. "My family has experienced some financial difficulties, Mr. Morrison. I came west seeking opportunities that might not be available to me back east." It was true enough, though it barely scratched the surface of the whole story. Jake seemed to sense there was more to it, but he didn't press for details. Instead, he handed the horse's lead rope to the young cowboy and stepped closer to Sarah, close enough that she could smell the scent of leather and sage that seemed to cling to him. "Keeping house on a ranch isn't like keeping house in Boston, Miss Mitchell. Out here, you might be cooking for a dozen hungry cowboys one day and doctoring a sick calf the next. You might go weeks without seeing another woman. And when trouble comes, and it always comes, you'll need to be able to handle yourself. Are you prepared for that kind of life?" Sarah met his gaze steadily, drawing on reserves of strength she'd discovered during her journey west. "I'm stronger than I look, Mr. Morrison, and I learn quickly. I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'm not easily frightened. I came here because I need this job, and I believe I can do it well." Something in her tone seemed to catch Jake's attention, and for a moment, his expression softened slightly. Perhaps he recognized something of his own determination in her words, or maybe he simply appreciated her honesty. Whatever the reason, he nodded slowly. "The job pays $30 a month, plus room and board. You'd have your own quarters in the main house, and you'd be expected to keep the house clean, do the cooking, and handle any other domestic tasks that come up. The work is hard, the hours are long, and I don't tolerate laziness or dishonesty. If you can't handle it, it's better to say so now than to leave me in a bind later." $30 a month was more than Sarah had dared to hope for, enough to live on and still send a little money back to her parents. She nodded eagerly, perhaps too eagerly, because Jake's eyes narrowed slightly. "There's one more thing, Miss Mitchell. I value my privacy, and I expect the same from anyone who works for me. I don't gossip, and I don't tolerate it in others. Whatever you might hear about me or my personal affairs, it stays here on the ranch. Is that understood?" "Perfectly, Mr. Morrison. I have no interest in gossip or personal matters that don't concern me." Jake studied her for another long moment, then nodded decisively. "All right, Miss Mitchell. You can start tomorrow if you're willing. I'll have one of the boars drive you back to town to collect your things. And you can move into the house this evening. We'll try it for a month and see how it works out for both of us." Relief flooded through Sarah so powerfully that she had to fight to keep her composure. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I won't disappoint you." "See that you don't," he replied, but there was no harshness in his tone. "Tommy," he called to the young cowboy, who had been holding the horse, "hitch up the buckboard and drive Miss Mitchell back to town. She'll be our new housekeeper." As Tommy hurried to prepare the wagon, Jake turned back to Sarah. "One last thing. Dinner is usually served at 6 o'clock sharp. The men work hard, and they expect their meals on time. Can you handle cooking for a dozen men?" Sarah thought of the elaborate dinner parties her mother had hosted in Boston, with their multiple courses and precise timing. "I can handle it, Mr. Morrison." "We'll see," he said, but there was something that might have been the beginning of a smile at the corners of his mouth. The ride back to town with Tommy gave Sarah a chance to learn more about life at the Morrison Ranch. The young cowboy was friendly and talkative, eager to share information about his employer and the other ranch hands. According to Tommy, Jake was a fair boss who worked harder than any of his men, but he could be demanding when it came to the care of his animals and the maintenance of his property. "He's been different since Mrs. Morrison died," Tommy confided as they bounced along the dusty road. "Used to smile more. Used to join in when we'd sit around the fire in the evenings telling stories. Now he mostly keeps to himself, works from dawn to dusk, and spends his evenings alone in that big house. It's not natural for a man to be so alone, but he won't hear of it. If anyone suggests he ought to think about remarrying." Sarah filed this information away, understanding that she would need to be sensitive to Jake's grief while still doing her job effectively. She had her own experience with loss and heartbreak, and she knew how difficult it could be to move forward when the past held such painful memories. Back at the boarding house, Sarah quickly packed her few belongings and settled her account with Mrs. Henderson. The older woman seemed genuinely sorry to see her go, having apparently taken a liking to her newest boarder. "You be careful out there, dear," Mrs. Henderson warned as Sarah prepared to leave. "Jake Morrison is a good man, but he's been hurt badly, and hurt men can be unpredictable. Don't take it personal if he seems cold or distant. It's not about you." Sarah thanked her for the advice and climbed into the buckboard beside Tommy for the return trip to the ranch. As they drove through the gathering dusk, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness about this new chapter in her life. She was leaving behind the safety and familiarity of town life for the isolation and challenges of ranch living. But she was also taking control of her destiny in a way that would have been impossible back in Boston. The Morrison Ranch looked different in the evening light, more mysterious, and somehow more beautiful. Lights glowed warmly in the windows of the main house, and she could see cowboys gathered around a fire near the bunkhouse, their voices carrying across the still air. It looked like a place where she could belong, if she proved herself worthy of acceptance. Jake met them at the front door, having apparently been watching for their return. He helped Sarah down from the wagon and carried her satchel into the house, leading her through rooms that were both elegant and practical. The furnishings were well made, but not ostentatious, and everywhere she looked, she could see evidence of a woman's touch in the carefully chosen colors and thoughtful arrangements. "These were Elena's choices," Jake said quietly, noticing her appreciation of the decor. "I haven't changed much since she died. Didn't see the point." He showed her to a comfortable room on the ground floor, near the kitchen, but separate from the main living areas. It was larger than her room at the boarding house, with a real bed, a wardrobe, and even a small sitting area by the window. Best of all, it had its own entrance, which would allow her to come and go without disturbing the rest of the household. "The kitchen is through that door," Jake explained, pointing to a connecting passage. "You'll find everything you need to prepare breakfast for the men. They usually eat at 5:30 before they head out for the day's work. I take my meals separately, in the dining room at 7 o'clock. Is that arrangement acceptable to you? Sarah nodded, understanding that Jake preferred to maintain some distance between himself and his employees. It was probably easier for him than trying to make conversation with a stranger, especially one who reminded him of the life he'd lost. After Jake left her to settle in, Sarah explored her new domain. The kitchen was spacious and well-equipped, with a large wood-burning stove, plenty of counter space, and a pantry stocked with basic supplies. She could see that whoever had been doing the cooking recently, probably one of the cowboys, had been making do with simple fare. Tomorrow, she would show them what a real cook could accomplish. Her first night at the ranch was restless, filled with unfamiliar sounds and the weight of new responsibilities. She could hear the night sounds of the desert, coyotes calling in the distance, the rustle of small animals in the brush, and the occasional lowing of cattle settling down for the night. It was so different from the urban sounds she was accustomed to, but there was something peaceful about it as well. She rose before dawn, determined to make a good impression with her first breakfast, drawing on memories of the hearty meals served to farm workers back east. She prepared eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy, along with strong coffee that would help fuel the cowboys through their long day. The men filed into the kitchen at exactly 5:30, their faces showing surprise and appreciation when they saw the spread she had prepared. "Well, I'll be damned," said an older cowboy who introduced himself as Cookie. "Looks like we finally got ourselves a real cook again. Ma'am, this is the finest breakfast I've seen in months." The other men echoed his sentiments, and Sarah felt a warm glow of satisfaction as she watched them enjoy her cooking. These were good men, she could tell, hard-working, honest, and appreciative of any effort made on their behalf. If she could win their approval, she would have allies who could help her succeed in this new environment. At 7 o'clock, she prepared a more refined breakfast for Jake and served it in the dining room. He ate in silence, but she noticed that he cleaned his plate completely and even accepted a second cup of coffee. When he finished, he looked up at her with something that might have been approval. "That was very good, Miss Mitchell." The men seemed pleased as well. "Thank you, Mr. Morrison. I hope to improve the meals even more as I become familiar with the supplies and equipment." "I'm sure you will," he said, rising from the table. "I'll be out with the herd most of the day, but if you need anything, Cookie can help you. He's been here longer than anyone and knows where everything is kept." As Jake left for his day's work, Sarah began to explore the house more thoroughly, assessing what needed to be done to restore it to its former glory. It was clear that the place had been neglected since Elena's death. Not dirty, exactly, but lacking the attention to detail that made a house feel like a home. Dust had accumulated in corners, windows needed washing, and many of the beautiful decorative touches had been put away or covered up. Sarah spent the morning cleaning and organizing, taking care to treat Elena's belongings with respect, while making the space more functional for daily living. She found photographs of Jake and his wife tucked away in drawers, and she could see why Pete had described Elena as beautiful. She had been a striking woman with dark hair and eyes, and in every picture, she and Jake looked radiantly happy together. As she worked, Sarah began to understand the depth of Jake's loss. This house had been designed as a love nest, a place where two people could build a life together and raise a family. Now it was a mausoleum, a shrine to what had been rather than a foundation for what could be. She wondered if Jake would ever be able to move past his grief and open his heart to the possibility of love again. The days that followed established a routine that worked well for everyone involved. Sarah proved herself to be an excellent cook and an efficient housekeeper, and the cowboys quickly came to appreciate her efforts. She learned their names and preferences, adjusting her cooking to accommodate their tastes while gradually introducing new dishes that expanded their culinary horizons. Jake remained polite but distant, treating her with the same courteous professionalism he showed to all his employees. He complimented her work when appropriate, but never engaged in personal conversation, maintaining the boundaries he had established from the beginning. Sarah respected his need for privacy, while secretly hoping that time would allow him to see her as more than just another hired hand. 3 weeks into her employment, that hope was put to the test when trouble came to the Morrison Ranch in the form of cattle rustlers. Sarah was in the kitchen, preparing the evening meal, when she heard the thunder of hoofbeats and the shouts of men riding hard toward the house. Through the window, she could see Jake and several of his cowboys returning from the range, their faces grim and their horses lathered with sweat. Jake burst through the kitchen door, his eyes scanning the room quickly before settling on Sarah. "Are you all right?" he demanded, his voice sharp with concern. "Yes, of course. What's wrong?" "Rustlers hit the south pasture, got away with about 50 head before we could stop them. They might come back tonight to finish the job, so I want you to stay in the house and keep away from the windows." Sarah felt a chill of fear, but tried to keep her voice steady. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Jake paused in his preparations to leave again, looking at her with surprise. "You're not frightened?" "I'm concerned, but I'm not helpless. If there's something I can do to help protect the ranch, I want to do it." For the first time since she'd known him, Jake smiled, a real smile that transformed his entire face and gave her a glimpse of the man he must have been before grief hardened his heart. "You're full of surprises, Miss Mitchell. All right, if you're willing, you can help by keeping watch from the upstairs windows. If you see anything suspicious, ring the dinner bell 3 times fast. Can you handle a rifle?" Sarah thought of the shooting lessons her father had insisted on during their summer visits to his brother's farm. "I'm not an expert, but I can hit what I aim at." Jake nodded approvingly and fetched a Winchester rifle from the gun cabinet, showing her how to load and fire it safely. "I hope you won't need it, but it's better to be prepared. The men and I will be patrolling the perimeter, but we can't be everywhere at once." As darkness fell, Sarah took up her position at an upstairs window that commanded a view of the main approach to the ranch. The night was eerily quiet, with none of the usual sounds of cattle and horses that normally provided a comforting background to ranch life. She could see the occasional flicker of movement as Jake's men moved through the shadows, but mostly she was alone with her thoughts and the weight of the rifle across her knees. Hours passed without incident, and Sarah was beginning to think that the rustlers had decided to cut their losses and move on to easier targets. But then she saw them, dark shapes moving stealthily through the brush toward the main corral where Jake kept his prize breeding stock. There were at least 6 of them, and they moved with the practiced efficiency of men who had done this many times before. Sarah rang the dinner bell 3 times, the sharp sound cutting through the night air like a warning cry. Almost immediately, she heard answering shouts from Jake's men as they converged on the area she had indicated. Gunfire erupted in the darkness, muzzle flashes lighting up the night like deadly fireflies. From her vantage point, Sarah could see the battle unfolding below. Jake's men had the advantage of knowing the terrain, but the rustlers were desperate and well-armed. The fight was fierce but brief, ending when the surviving rustlers realized they were outnumbered and outgunned. They fled into the darkness, leaving behind two of their number who would never steal cattle again. When the shooting stopped, Sarah made her way downstairs to find Jake and his men gathered in the kitchen, tending to wounds and discussing the night's events. Cookie had taken a bullet in the shoulder, and young Tommy was sporting a nasty gash on his forehead from a ricocheting bullet. Sarah immediately took charge of the medical situation, cleaning wounds and applying bandages with the skill of someone who had learned to be practical about such things. "You did good tonight, Miss Mitchell," Jake told her as she finished bandaging Cookie's shoulder. "That warning gave us the edge we needed to stop them before they could do real damage." "I'm just glad everyone is all right," Sarah replied, but she felt a warm glow of satisfaction at his praise. For the first time since arriving at the ranch, she felt like she truly belonged there. The incident with the rustlers marked a turning point in Sarah's relationship with Jake and the other ranch hands. She had proven herself under fire, literally, and had earned their respect and acceptance in a way that mere cooking and cleaning never could have accomplished. Jake began to include her in discussions about ranch business, valuing her opinions and insights in ways that surprised them both. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah found herself settling into ranch life with an ease that amazed her. The work was hard, and the hours were long. But there was a satisfaction in it that she had never experienced in her pampered Boston existence. She was contributing something meaningful, using her skills and intelligence to help build something lasting and worthwhile. Her relationship with Jake evolved slowly, built on mutual respect and shared experiences, rather than romantic gestures or flowery words. He began to linger after meals, engaging her in conversations about books, current events, and their respective pasts. Sarah learned about his childhood in Texas, his decision to come west after the Civil War, and his dreams of building a cattle empire that would last for generations. In return, she shared carefully edited versions of her own story, focusing on her family's financial troubles, while glossing over the more painful details of betrayal and scandal. Jake seemed to sense that there was more to her past than she was revealing, but he respected her privacy just as she respected his grief. The first real breakthrough in their relationship came on a warm evening in late spring, when Sarah found Jake sitting alone on the front porch, staring out at the star-filled sky with an expression of profound sadness. She had been planning to retire to her room, but something in his posture made her pause. "Beautiful night," she said softly, settling into the chair beside him without waiting for an invitation. "Elena loved nights like this," Jake replied, his voice barely above a whisper. "She used to say that the stars were God's way of reminding us that there was beauty in the darkness, if we just knew how to look for it." Sarah felt her heart ache for this man, who carried so much pain beneath his stoic exterior. "She sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was everything to me," Jake continued, the words seeming to pour out of him as though a dam had finally burst. "When she died, I thought my life was over. I couldn't see any point in going on. Couldn't imagine ever being happy again. I've been going through the motions for 3 years, just existing instead of living." "Grief is a heavy burden," Sarah said gently, "but carrying it alone makes it even heavier." Jake turned to look at her, his blue eyes reflecting the starlight. "How do you know so much about grief, Sarah? What happened to you back in Boston that sent you running to the frontier? The question hung in the air between them, and Sarah realized that this was a moment of truth. She could continue to hide behind carefully constructed half-truths, or she could trust this man with the real story of her past. The decision came easier than she had expected. "I was engaged to be married," she began, her voice steady despite the pain the memory still caused. "Charles Whitmore, from one of Boston's most prominent families. I thought he loved me, thought we would build a life together based on mutual respect and affection. But when my father's business failed and our family lost its social standing, Charles showed his true colors." She told Jake about the broken engagement, the vicious rumors, and the scandal that had destroyed her reputation and her family's future. She spoke of her father's heart attack, her mother's retreat into laudanum-induced oblivion, and her own decision to head west in search of a new beginning. "So you see," she concluded, "I understand something about having your world torn apart by forces beyond your control. I know what it feels like to lose everything you thought was permanent and to have to rebuild from nothing." Jake was quiet for a long time after she finished speaking, processing her story and perhaps comparing it to his own experiences with loss and betrayal. When he finally spoke, his voice was filled with a mixture of admiration and anger. "This Charles Whitmore sounds like a coward and a fool. Any man who would abandon a woman like you because of money doesn't deserve to breathe the same air as decent people." "Perhaps," Sarah replied, "but his betrayal taught me something valuable about my own strength. I discovered that I could survive things I never thought possible, that I could adapt and overcome obstacles that once would have seemed insurmountable. In a strange way, coming west has been the best thing that ever happened to me. Even though it brought you to this godforsaken desert, cooking for a bunch of rough cowboys and working for a man who's forgotten how to smile." Sarah turned to face him fully, her green eyes serious and intent. "Especially because it brought me here, Jake. This ranch, these people, this life, it's real in a way that my Boston existence never was. Back there, I was playing a role, trying to be what society expected me to be. Here, I can be myself, and that's worth more than all the social standing and financial security in the world." Something shifted in Jake's expression as she spoke, a softening around the edges that suggested her words had touched something deep inside him. For a moment, the walls he had built around his heart seemed to waver, and Sarah caught a glimpse of the man he had been before grief had claimed him. "You're an remarkable woman, Sarah Mitchell," he said quietly. "Elena would have liked you. She always said that true strength came from surviving hardship with grace and dignity intact." It was the first time Jake had spoken Elena's name without pain shadowing his features, and Sarah felt a flutter of hope that perhaps he was finally beginning to heal. They sat together in comfortable silence after that, watching the stars wheel overhead and listening to the night sounds of the desert. When Sarah finally rose to go inside, Jake caught her hand gently. "Thank you," he said simply, "for listening, for understanding, for being here." "Thank you for trusting me with your memories," Sarah replied. "Elena must have been very special to inspire such devotion." "She was," Jake agreed. "But so are you, Sarah. I'm beginning to realize that a man can honor the past without being imprisoned by it." As summer progressed, the relationship between Sarah and Jake continued to evolve and deepen. They began taking evening walks together, exploring the ranch and discussing their dreams for its future. Jake showed her his plans for expanding the operation, his ideas for improving the breeding program, and his vision of creating a legacy that would endure long after he was gone. Sarah found herself contributing ideas and suggestions that Jake valued and often implemented. Her education and business sense, combined with her growing understanding of ranch operations, made her a valuable partner in planning and decision-making. She helped him reorganize his record-keeping system, suggested improvements to the layout of the corrals, and even proposed a kitchen garden that would provide fresh vegetables for the ranch hands. The other cowboys watched this developing partnership with approval and not a little relief. They had all been concerned about Jake's isolation and grief, and they could see that Sarah's presence was bringing him back to life in ways that nothing else had been able to accomplish. Cookie, in particular, became one of Sarah's strongest supporters, often commenting that she was exactly what the boss needed to help him remember how to be happy. The turning point in their relationship came during a particularly difficult calving season, when a valuable cow was having trouble delivering her calf. Jake had been working with the animal for hours, trying everything he knew to help her, but the situation was becoming desperate. Sarah, who had been assisting by holding lanterns and fetching supplies, suddenly remembered something her uncle had told her about a similar situation on his farm. "Jake," she said urgently, "what if we try repositioning her? My uncle once told me about a technique where you help the cow lie on her other side to change the angle of the birth canal." Jake looked at her with surprise, then nodded grimly. "It's worth a try. We're running out of options." Working together, they managed to help the cow change position, and within minutes, the calf was born, alive and healthy despite the difficult delivery. As they watched the newborn struggle to its feet and begin nursing, Jake turned to Sarah with an expression of wonder and gratitude. "You saved them both," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "How did you know to suggest that?" "I remembered something from my childhood visits to my uncle's farm," Sarah replied, but she was more focused on the look in Jake's eyes than on her own words. There was something there she had never seen before, a warmth and tenderness that made her heart race. "Sarah," Jake said softly, reaching out to touch her face with gentle fingers, "I don't know what I would do without you anymore. You've become so much more than just my housekeeper. You've become—" "What, Jake?" she whispered, leaning into his touch. "You've become the light that's guiding me out of the darkness," he finished, his voice barely audible. "I never thought I could feel this way again, never thought my heart could heal enough to love someone new. But you've shown me that it's possible to honor the past while still embracing the future." The kiss that followed was gentle and tentative at first, as though Jake was afraid that too much passion might shatter the fragile hope that was growing between them. But as Sarah responded with equal tenderness, the kiss deepened into something that spoke of promises and possibilities, of two wounded souls finding healing in each other's arms. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard and looking at each other with a mixture of wonder and uncertainty. The moment was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps as Cookie came to check on the progress with the difficult birth. "Well, I'll be damned," the old cowboy said, taking in the scene before him with a knowing grin. "Looks like we got ourselves two miracles tonight, a healthy calf and a boss who's finally remembered how to smile." Jake and Sarah stepped apart, both blushing like teenagers caught in their first romance. But neither tried to deny what Cookie had observed. and the old cowboy's approval was evident in his pleased expression. "About time, if you ask me," Cookie continued, tipping his hat to Sarah. "Ma'am, you've done more good for this ranch in 6 months than all the rest of us combined have managed in 3 years. The boss here has been walking around like a ghost for too long, and it's good to see him coming back to the land of the living." Over the following weeks, Jake and Sarah's relationship continued to develop, though they were careful to maintain appropriate boundaries given their employer-employee situation. They spent their evenings together, talking and planning for the future, and Jake began to include Sarah in more and more aspects of ranch management. It became clear to everyone that she was no longer just the housekeeper, but was becoming Jake's partner in every sense of the word. The transformation in Jake was remarkable to witness. The grim, solitary man who had hired Sarah 6 months earlier was gradually being replaced by someone who laughed easily, engaged with his workers, and looked forward to each new day. He began making improvements to the house that had been neglected since Elena's death, not to erase her memory, but to create new memories with Sarah. One evening in early fall, as they sat together on the front porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant shades of orange and gold, Jake took Sarah's hand and turned to face her with an expression of nervous determination. "Sarah," he began, his voice slightly unsteady, "I have something I need to ask you, and I hope you'll hear me out before you give me an answer." Sarah's heart began to race, sensing that this was the moment she had been hoping for and dreading in equal measure. "Of course, Jake, you can ask me anything. I know that when you came here, you were running from a past that had hurt you badly. I know that you took this job because you needed work, not because you were looking for romance or marriage. But over these past months, you've become so much more to me than I ever thought possible." Jake paused, gathering his thoughts and his courage before continuing. "I love you, Sarah. I love your strength, your intelligence, your kindness, and your courage. I love the way you've brought life back to this ranch and hope back to my heart. I know I'm not the same man I was when Elena was alive, and I know I can't promise you the kind of carefree happiness that young couples dream about. But I can promise you my devotion, my respect, and my commitment to building a life together that honors both our pasts while embracing our future." Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she listened to his heartfelt declaration. This was so different from Charles's calculated proposal, which had been more about social advantage than genuine emotion. Jake was offering her his heart, scarred and healing though it might be, and asking for hers in return. "Jake," she said softly, her voice thick with emotion, "I love you too. I've loved you for months, but I was afraid to hope that you could ever see me as more than a reminder of what you'd lost. You've given me a home, a purpose, and a chance to be the woman I was meant to be. Yes, I'll marry you, and I'll spend the rest of my life proving that your faith in me wasn't misplaced." The kiss they shared this time was different from their first, deeper, more passionate, and filled with the promise of a future they would build together. When they finally broke apart, both were laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the joy of finding love when they had least expected it. "There's one more thing," Jake said, reaching into his pocket and pulling out a small velvet box. "This was my grandmother's ring. Elena never wore it because it didn't fit her properly, but I had it resized, hoping that someday I might find someone who could wear it with pride." The ring was beautiful in its simplicity, a single diamond surrounded by smaller stones, in a setting that spoke of craftsmanship and enduring love. As Jake slipped it onto Sarah's finger, she marveled at how perfectly it fit, as though it had been waiting for her all along. "It's perfect," she whispered, admiring the way the stones caught the last rays of the setting sun. "I'll treasure it always, not just for its beauty, but for what it represents, your willingness to love again, and my chance to be part of something lasting and meaningful." They spent the rest of the evening making plans for their wedding and their future together. Jake wanted a simple ceremony, perhaps in the main room of the house, with just the ranch hands and a few friends from town as witnesses. Sarah agreed, having no desire for the elaborate social spectacle that her first engagement had promised. This time, the focus would be on the commitment they were making to each other, not on impressing society or maintaining appearances. As autumn progressed toward winter, preparations for the wedding moved forward alongside the usual ranch activities. Sarah wrote to her parents, sharing the news of her engagement and her happiness in her new life. Her mother's response was filled with relief and joy, expressing gratitude that her daughter had found love and security in the wilderness. Her father, though still weak from his heart condition, managed to write a brief note, giving his blessing and expressing his pride in Sarah's courage and resilience. The wedding took place on a crisp December morning, with the ranch house decorated with evergreen boughs and winter wildflowers that Sarah and some of the Cowboy's wives had gathered from the surrounding hills. Sarah wore a simple but elegant dress that she had sewn herself from fabric ordered from the general store in town, and Jake wore his best suit with a new string tie that Cookie had insisted on buying as a wedding gift. The ceremony was performed by the circuit preacher who traveled through the territory, and the vows they exchanged were heartfelt and personal, speaking of partnership, respect, and the commitment to face whatever challenges life might bring together. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the small gathering erupted in cheers and congratulations that could probably be heard for miles across the desert. The celebration that followed was exactly what Sarah had hoped for: warm, genuine, and filled with the kind of joy that comes from people who truly care about each other's happiness. The Cowboys had prepared a feast that rivaled anything Sarah had ever cooked, and there was music and dancing that lasted well into the evening. Even the usually reserved Jake was seen laughing and joining in the festivities, his happiness evident to everyone present. As the evening wound down and the guests began to drift away to their own homes and quarters, Jake and Sarah found themselves alone on the front porch, where they had shared so many important conversations. The stars were brilliant in the clear winter sky, and the desert air was crisp and clean. "No regrets?" Jake asked, pulling Sarah close against the cold. "None whatsoever," Sarah replied, snuggling into his warmth. "This is exactly where I belong, exactly who I was meant to be. Thank you for giving me the chance to prove myself, and thank you for having the courage to love again. Thank you for teaching me that the heart can heal without forgetting, that it's possible to honor the past while still embracing the future. Elena would be happy for us, I think. She always said that love was meant to be shared, not hoarded." As they stood together under the vast canopy of stars, Sarah reflected on the incredible journey that had brought her to this moment. A year ago, she had been a broken woman fleeing scandal and disgrace, with no idea what the future might hold. Now, she was Mrs. Jake Morrison, partner in a thriving ranch, and wife to a man who valued her for exactly who she was. The pain of her past hadn't disappeared entirely. She still sometimes thought of her parents, struggling back in Boston, still occasionally felt the sting of Charles's betrayal. But those experiences had shaped her into the woman she had become, giving her the strength and resilience that had enabled her to build this new life. She had learned that sometimes the most devastating losses could lead to the most unexpected blessings, that courage and determination could overcome almost any obstacle. As Jake led her inside to begin their new life as husband and wife, Sarah felt a deep sense of peace and contentment settle over her. She had found her place in the world, her purpose, and her true love. The future stretched ahead of them, full of possibilities and challenges, but she faced it without fear. Whatever came next, they would meet it together, and that made all the difference in the world. The ranch house that had once been a monument to grief and loss was now filled with hope and new beginnings. And in the master bedroom that Jake had shared with Elena, Sarah took her place not as a replacement for what had been lost, but as the foundation for what was yet to come. Their love story was just beginning, written in the vast landscape of the American West, where dreams could still come true for those brave enough to pursue them.